20 minutes before the speeches at my son's wedding, Colin leaned close enough that nobody else could hear him. "Dad, I think you should head out." For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. I was 65 years old, wearing the same dark suit I'd bought for his college graduation, standing in a ballroom outside Raleigh with 200 people celebrating his marriage. And my son was asking me to leave. "Before the speeches?" I asked. Colin looked toward the head table. "Mallory's family is pretty formal. Grant has something planned, and I just think it would be easier." Easier. That word had followed me all afternoon. It had started during the photograph. The photographer lined up Mallory's parents, her brother, Colin, and the bridesmaid. When I stepped forward, Mallory quietly said, "Could we get one with immediate family first?" I stopped. Colin heard her. He didn't correct, so I stepped aside. Then I found my place card had been moved from the family table to table 14, beside 3 people from Mallory's father's accounting firm. Again, Colin said nothing. I told myself it was seating logistics. Weddings are complicated. People make mistakes. Then Grant Bennett found me near the bar. Grant was 62, well-dressed, recently retired from a regional banking company, and the kind of man who could ask what you did for a living while already deciding what your answer meant. "You still doing HVAC work, Warren?" "Not much anymore. I'd owned a small heating and air conditioning company for 31 years, 9 employees at our biggest. Nothing impressive enough for a magazine. It paid my mortgage, kept food on the table, and helped put Colin through North Carolina State without student loan." Grant smiled. "Good. You've earned the chance to slow down." Then one of his friends joined us. Grant introduced me. "This is Warren, Colin's dad. Worked in heating and cooling." Work, past tense. As though that was the only relevant fact about me. I shook the man's hand. "No problem. I'd spent my entire adult life entering homes through side doors, mechanical rooms, basements, rooftop. You get used to people noticing the uniform before the person wearing it. What I wasn't used to was my own son doing it. So when Colin asked me to leave before the speeches, I didn't argue. I looked at him for a few seconds. "Is this what you want?" He rubbed the side of his thumb against his wedding band. "New habit. I just don't want anything awkward tonight." "What would be awkward about me sitting at a table?" "That's not what I mean." "Then say what you mean." His eyes moved toward Mallory. She was laughing with her mother near the dance floor. Colin lowered his voice. "They know a certain version of thing." That got my attention. "What thing?" "Dad, not here." I waited. He didn't continue, so I nodded. "All right." His face changed. Relief. That hurt more than the request. "You're leaving?" "You asked me to." "I appreciate it." "No." He frowned. "Don't thank me like I volunteered." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. "You made a decision. Own it." Then I walked out. No scene. No speech. Nobody stopped the music. Outside, the evening was warm and humid. I reached my truck, tossed my jacket across the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel. For maybe 30 seconds, I considered going back. Not to confront Colin, just to make him explain what a certain version of things meant. I didn't. If a 36-year-old man was embarrassed to introduce his father accurately, I wasn't going to chase him around his own wedding, asking for permission to exist. I started the truck. My phone rang before I left the parking lot. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. "Warren Hale?" "Yes, this is Grant Bennett, Mallory's father." I looked back toward the hotel. "We just spoke." "I know. Where are you?" "In my truck." "Why?" That was not the question I expected. Colin asked me to leave. Silent. Then, "He did what?" I said nothing. Grant's voice changed. "Warren, don't drive anywhere." "Why?" "Because I'm standing here with a microphone in my hand, and the first person I was supposed to thank tonight just disappeared." I stared through the windshield. "For what?" Another silence. "You really don't know?" "No." Grant lowered his voice. "Colin told us you didn't want anyone mentioning." "Mentioning what?" "The money." I stopped. "What money?" Grant didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, he sounded confused. "The money you gave them for the house." I tightened my grip on the phone. "I didn't give them money for a house." Silent. Longer this time. "Warren, they told us you gave them $80,000 for the down payment." "No. I had given Colin money over the years. College expenses. A used car when his first one died. $10,000 when he and Mallory moved after their engagement. But not $80,000. Not for a house." Grant spoke carefully. "Then I think we have a problem." I looked at the hotel entrance. "Why would Colin tell you that?" "He didn't." "Who did?" "Mallory." "That changed things." Grant continued. "She told us you'd given them the money but didn't want it discussed because the two of you weren't close." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Colin had eaten dinner at my house 2 Sundays earlier. "Grant, my son and I speak every week." He went quiet. "I need you to come back inside." "No, Warren. I'm not going back into that room until I understand what I'm walking into." Fair enough, apparently, because Grant didn't push. Instead, he said, "There's something else." Of course there was. "What?" "The speech I was about to give." "What about it?" "It wasn't just about the house." I waited. Grant continued. "I was going to say that I respected Colin because he built his life without much family support." I closed my eye. "Who told you that?" This time, Grant answered immediately. "Colin did." There it was. "What exactly did he say?" "That you worked constantly when he was young. That after his mother left, he mostly raised himself." I didn't speak. Colin's mother, Rebecca, had left when he was 11. That part was true. What wasn't true was the rest. I reduced my hours, turned down expansion work, learned to cook 6 meals well enough that a kid wouldn't complain, drove him to soccer practice, orthodontist appointments, college visits. I wasn't a perfect father, but Colin did not raise himself. Grant said, Warren, I'm here. I think you should know one more thing before you decide whether to come back. I already knew I wasn't going back, but I listened. About 6 months ago, Colin and Mallory came to our house for dinner. Colin told me something about you. What? Grant hesitated. He said the two of you barely had a relationship anymore because you'd never really supported his career. I looked down at the steering wheel. My company had paid Colin every summer from 16 through college. After graduation, I covered 3 months of his rent while he interviewed for engineering job. I had sat in the second row when he received his first promotion. Anything else? Yes. What? He said when he started becoming successful, you began asking him for money. That one surprised me enough that I actually laughed. Once, quietly, Grant heard it. I take it that isn't true. No. Have you ever asked Colin for money? Never. I had enough. Not because I was wealthy. Because I planned. There's a difference. Grant exhaled. Then I owe you an apology. You don't. I believed him. You had no reason not to. I looked toward the hotel again. Through the glass entrance, I could see guests moving toward the ballroom. Then Grant asked, why would your son tell us this? I thought about Colin's face when he asked me to leave. The relief when I agreed. The family photograph I'd been removed from. Table 14. They know a certain version of thing. Now I understood the sentence. At least part of it. I don't know yet, I said. Grant lowered his voice. But you're going to find out. Yes. Before we hung up, he said, Warren, there's something I can send you. What? An email Colin sent me before the wedding. About what? You. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. I opened the attachment. It was a short note Colin had written to Grant about the speeches. Halfway down, one paragraph was highlighted. I read it twice. If you mention my dad, please keep it brief. He wasn't really involved during the years that shaped me, and I don't want tonight to become uncomfortable for Mallory. Below that was another line. I learned early that if I wanted something, I had to build it myself. I sat alone in the parking lot while my son's wedding continued 50 yards away. For most of the afternoon, I'd thought Colin was embarrassed by what I did for a living. Now I realized that wasn't the real problem. My presence threatened the story he had told about how he became the man standing inside that ballroom. And for some reason, I didn't yet understand. My son had decided it was easier to remove his father from the wedding than correct the story. I drove home without calling Colin. That was deliberate. When you're angry, information starts looking like permission. Permission to confront, permission to accuse, permission to say something you'll spend the next week defending instead of solving the actual problem. I wanted facts first. At 9:18 the next morning, Grant called. Did you sleep? Enough. I spoke to Mallory. I sat down at the kitchen table. What did she say? That she thought you knew what Colin had told us. About what? About your relationship. I waited. Grant continued. She said Colin told her years ago that after his mother left, you basically disappeared into work. That isn't true. I know that now. Does she? There was a pause. I think she's starting to understand that. Starting? She believed him, Warren. For years. That mattered. If Mallory had been helping Colin create the story, that was one problem. If she had believed it, that was another. What about the $80,000? Grant sighed. That part is different. How? She says Colin told her the money came from you. It didn't. Then where did it come from? Good question. Grant hesitated. I may know. I leaned back. The house was purchased 3 years ago. I helped them with part of the down payment. How much? $40,000. Okay. My wife and I assumed your 80 was the rest. There was no 80. I checked some old emails this morning. He sounded uncomfortable. Colin told us the total family contribution was $120,000. I did the math. 40 from Grant, supposedly 80 from me. You have the email? Yes. Send it. It arrived while we were still on the phone. Colin had written, between what Dad contributed and what you and Diane generously offered, we can avoid mortgage insurance and keep a larger emergency fund. No amount. Careful wording. Grant had apparently supplied the number himself based on what Mallory later told him. So Colin never wrote 80,000. No. Mallory said it. Yes. Where did she get the number? She says Colin. I rubbed my forehead. Did you ask him? Not yet. Don't. Grant went quiet. You don't want me to? I want to hear his answer before he knows we're comparing versions. That made sense to him. All right. Then Grant said, there's another thing. I almost smiled. I was getting used to that sentence. What? Last year, Colin asked me for advice about retirement account. That didn't seem unusual. He said you had almost nothing saved and that he expected to help support you eventually. I stared at the wall. Did he ask you for money? No. Did he ask you to plan for me? No. He used it as an example of why he wanted to be financially independent. That was almost worse. My son had turned me into a cautionary tale. Warren, I have retirement savings. How much isn't my business? Correct. But you're not depending on Colin. No. I had my house paid off. Investment account. Income from the sale of the HVAC company. Enough to live comfortably if I didn't suddenly develop a taste for yacht. Grant said, I think you need to talk to him. I will. Today. No. Why wait? Because I still don't know what I'm asking him. After we hung up, I opened a filing cabinet in my office. I wasn't looking for proof that I had been a good father. I wasn't going to build a presentation called Things Warren Hale Did for His Son. I wanted to understand the money. 3 years earlier, when Colin and Mallory bought their house, Colin had told me they had enough for the down payment. I remembered offering to help. He said, we're good, Dad. Really? I had believed him. So where had the missing $80,000 come from? At 10:02, I called the accountant who had handled the sale of my business, not because I thought the money came from me, because Colin had once had limited access to one of my business accounts while helping me close out the company. My accountant, Susan Keller, answered. Warren, haven't heard from you in a while? I need you to check something. What? Any transfers involving Colin 3 to 4 years ago? Large one. How large? Anything over 10,000. She was quiet. That sounds ominous. I'm hoping it's boring. I'll look. At 10:31, she called back. One transfer. My stomach tightened. How much? 25,000. To Colin? No. That stopped. Where? To an account belonging to Hale Mechanical Holding. I knew the name. It was a temporary account created during the sale of my company. That was mine. Originally, yes. What do you mean originally? Susan paused. After closing, you authorized distribution rights to yourself and Colin. I remembered. For 60 days, I had been traveling back and forth during the final equipment sale, and Colin helped sign off on small vendor payment. What happened to the 25? It was transferred again 2 days later. To where? Susan read the destination. I didn't recognize the bank. Can you tell whose account? No. Not from my record. Was it authorized properly? Yes. By who? Another pause. Colin. I stood. Was he allowed to do that? At the time, yes. Technically, that didn't mean the money belonged to him. What was the memo? Susan checked. Short-term reimbursement. I had never received a reimbursement request for $25,000. Anything else? No. I thanked her and hung up. Now I had a fact, not a conclusion. Colin had moved $25,000 from an account connected to the sale of my company. 3 years later, his in-laws believed I had given him $80,000 toward a house. Maybe the two things weren't related. Maybe. At 11:10, Colin finally called. I let it ring twice, then answered. Morning, Dad. He sounded terrible. Can I come over? Yes. He arrived 25 minutes later. No Mallory. No suit, jeans, t-shirt, wedding band still on. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I screwed up. That covers a lot of territory. I know. Start with why you asked me to leave. He rubbed both hands over his face. Because Grant was going to talk about you. I know. His eyes lifted. He called you? Yes. Colin looked sick. What did he tell you? Enough to know I need answers from you, not him. He nodded slowly. I told Mallory some things years ago. Things about me. Yes. That weren't true. He didn't answer. Colin. Yes. Why? He stared at the table. Because when we started dating, her family intimidated me. I waited. They had money, connection. Grant knew people everywhere. Mallory went to private school. Her brother had internships lined up before he graduated. And you? I had you. He said it like that was somehow a problem. I didn't react. He continued. You worked HVAC. Mom left. We lived in the same small house for 20 years. A house you never missed a mortgage payment on. I know. Go on. I wanted them to think I had built myself. There it was. Simple, ugly, believable. So you made me absent. Yes. And poor. He hesitated. Yes. And dependent on you. Longer hesitation. Yes, I nodded, then asked, where did the $80,000 come from? His face changed. Completely. Not shame. Fear. That was the first moment I knew the money mattered more than the wedding story. What, 80,000? Don't. He looked away. Grant thinks I gave you 80,000 toward the house. Silent. Mallory says you told her that. Colin stood. Dad, that's complicated. No, 80,000 is a number. I reached for the notepad beside me. And while we're simplifying numbers, why did you transfer $25,000 out of Hale Mechanical Holdings 3 years ago? He stopped breathing for a sec. I saw it. Then he sat back down. Who told you? My accountant. Colin closed his eye. I waited. When he finally looked at me again, the embarrassment from the wedding was gone. So was the defensive son trying to explain social insecurity. This was something else. Dad? What? The house money isn't the worst part. I didn't move. He swallowed. Because I didn't just lie to Mallory about where it came from. Pause. I lied to you about what happened to the rest. I didn't ask Colin what he meant. Not immediately. I put the notepad down. Start at the beginning. He stared at his hand. When you sold the company, I was in trouble. What kind of trouble? Credit cards, a personal loan, some money I borrowed from Eric. Eric was his college roommate. How much? About $42,000. That surprised me. Colin had been earning good money by then. How did you get $42,000 in debt? Trying to look like I wasn't. I waited. He gave a tired laugh. Trip, restaurant, the apartment downtown, the car. Mallory? No. Me. That answer mattered. She knew I had some debt, not how much. And the $25,000? When I had access to the company account, I transferred it. Without asking me. Yes. Did you intend to pay it back? At first. I looked at him. At first isn't an answer. No, I didn't pay it back. There was no point pretending otherwise. So you stole $25,000 from me. His jaw tightened. I had authorization on the account. You had authorization to pay company expenses. I know. Not yourself. I know. He finally looked at me. I told myself I'd replace it before you noticed, but I didn't notice. No. And that made it easier. He nodded. I got up and poured coffee. My hands were steady. That almost seemed to bother him more than if I'd shouted. What happened to the rest? Colin looked confused. You said you lied to me about what happened to the rest. He took a breath. After the sale, you asked me to help close some vendor account. I remember. One of the equipment buyers overpaid. How much? $38,000. I stopped beside the counter. No. What? They didn't overpay. They paid a deposit and then the final invoice. I know that now. Colin. He looked down. I told you they had overpaid. I remembered the conversation. He had called while I was visiting my sister in Tennessee. He said one buyer had accidentally sent too much and that he would handle the refund. I told him to take care of it. You refunded $38,000? Not to the buyer. The kitchen went very quiet. Where did it go? To an account I controlled. 25 plus 38, 63,000. I sat down again. And the other 17? He looked at me. What? Grant thinks I contributed 80,000. You've accounted for 63. Colin rubbed his forehead. The other 17 wasn't yours. Whose? Mine. Saving. So that was the 80. 17,000 of Colin's money. 63,000 that had come through my business. Then Grant's 40,000. 120,000 toward the house. The exact number Grant had mentioned. You used 63,000 of my money for your down payment. Yes. And told Mallory I gave it to you. Yes. That explained the money. It did not explain why my son had spent years telling people I had barely raised him. Why make me the bad father? Colin looked toward the window. Because the money story created another problem. What problem? Mallory wanted to thank you. I said nothing. After we bought the house, she kept saying we should have you over, take you somewhere, do something. And I kept putting it off. Why? Because you would have had no idea what she was thanking you for. There it was. One lie requiring another. So instead of telling her the truth, you told her we weren't close. Yes. And when she asked why, I told her you weren't around much when I was growing up. I leaned back. That's how this started? Yes. Not because you were ashamed I fixed air conditioners? His face tightened. That was part of it. At least he didn't hide from that one. When I met Grant, he asked what you did. I said you owned an HVAC company. He asked how big it was. 9 employees. I know. Apparently 9 wasn't enough. Dad, I'm asking. Colin looked miserable. No. Back then it didn't feel like enough. I nodded. Keep going. I was around Mallory's family and everyone had these stories. Her uncle was a surgeon. Grant was a bank executive. Her mother ran a foundation. I was embarrassed that I'd spent years telling Mallory I came from nothing. You didn't come from nothing. I know that now. No, you knew it then. That stopped him. You just preferred the other story. He didn't argue. My phone buzzed. Mallory, I showed Colin the screen. Does she know you're here? Yes. Does she know about the money? He hesitated. She knows some of it. Which part? That I lied. That's not a part. That's a category. He almost smiled. Almost. Then it disappeared. She doesn't know the 63 came from you. I answered the call. Warren? Morning, Mallory. Is Colin there? Yes. Can I come over? I looked at him. He nodded. Come. She arrived 15 minutes later. No makeup, hair tied back. She had changed out of the clothes she'd worn to the hotel that morning. She sat beside Colin but left several inches between them. I owe you an apology, she said, for asking me to leave. Her eyes widened. I didn't ask you to leave. I looked at Colin. He stared at the table. Mallory turned toward him. You told me your dad left because he was upset about the seating. I didn't say anything. She looked back at me. I didn't know he asked you to go. That was his decision. Mallory's expression changed. How many decisions did you make for everyone yesterday? Colin said nothing. She turned to me. And the photograph. I need to explain that. You wanted immediate family. I wanted one photograph with my parents and brother before we did both family. The photographer misunderstood me. And Colin? He knew the schedule. We both looked at him. Another small lie. Not necessary. Just convenient. Mallory took a breath. My dad told me what you said about the house. Which part? That you never gave us $80,000. Colin spoke. Mallory. No. She held up a hand. I want to hear Warren. So I told her. Not everything. Just the numbers. 25,000 transferred from the closing account. 38,000 diverted instead of being returned where Colin had told me it was going. 17,000 from Colin. Mallory's face changed slowly. When I finished, she turned to her husband. You told me Warren gave it to us. I know. You said he insisted. I know. You said he wouldn't take repayment because he wanted to make up for not being around when you were younger. I looked at Colin. That part was new. Mallory noticed. Oh my God. She stood. That's not true either. No, I said. She walked toward the kitchen and stopped. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she turned. So every time I defended you, Colin stood. Mallory. No, stay there. He did. She looked at me. Do you know why I didn't push harder about your seat yesterday? No. Because Colin told me crowds made you uncomfortable. I almost laughed again. I spent 30 years dealing with customers. I know that now. And table 14? She looked at Colin. That wasn't my seating plan. I didn't need the rest explained. Where was I supposed to sit? Next to Colin. Exactly where my original place card had been. Mallory's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She seemed more angry than hurt. I thought you didn't like me, Warren. That surprised me. Why? Because you were always polite, but distant. Colin said you resented my family. I looked at my son. How long? Mallory answered. Since we got engaged. 4 years. 4 years of ordinary dinners, holidays, and conversations where both of us had been reacting to a version of the other person that Colin had created. I asked, why would he tell you I resented your family? She looked at Colin. Because I kept asking why we never spent more time with you. Colin sat back down. There it was again. A lie solving the problem created by the previous lie. Mallory picked up her purse. I'm going to my parents' house. Colin stood. Can we talk first? We've been talking for years. Apparently you were the only one who knew which parts were real. She headed toward the door, then stopped. Warren, my dad's having breakfast at their house tomorrow. Just family. I waited. I'd like you to come. Colin looked at her. Mallory didn't look back. Why? I asked. Because there are things I need to ask my husband, and I'm done asking them in private where he can give everyone a different answer. I shook my head. Don't turn breakfast into a trial. I'm not. She opened the door. I'm trying to figure out who I married. After she left, Colin remained standing. I gathered the papers from the table. Dad, please don't go tomorrow. I looked up. That was an interesting request. Why? Because it'll make everything worse. For who? He didn't answer. Colin. His face had the same expression I'd seen when I mentioned the 25,000. Fear, not embarrassment. Grant doesn't know everything. About the money? No. Then what? Colin sat down again. For several seconds, he couldn't look at me. Finally, he said, about how I got my first job. I waited. He swallowed. I told him you tried to stop me from taking it. I remembered that first job very well, because I was the reason Colin got the interview. Colin got his first engineering job at 23. The company was called Merit System, a commercial building contractor in Durham. What Colin apparently hadn't told Grant was that I knew Tom Merritt. Not well. I'd serviced HVAC equipment in 2 buildings Tom owned, and we'd talked enough over the years that when Colin graduated, I called him. I didn't ask Tom to hire my son. I asked him to interview him. Colin did the rest. What exactly did you tell Grant? Colin rubbed his palms together. That you wanted me to work for you. That part's true. And that when I chose engineering instead, you got angry. That part isn't. I know. What else? He looked away. That you told me I'd fail without you. I sat quietly. The actual conversation had happened in my garage. Colin had received the offer from Merritt and was nervous about taking it. I told him, if you want my opinion, take the job. You can always come work with me later. Go find out what you're capable of when I'm not signing your paycheck. Apparently, that had become something else. Why did Grant need to hear any version of that? Because he asked how I got started. So you told him you succeeded despite... Yes, and not that I introduced you to Tom? No, I nodded. Anything else I should know before breakfast? Colin didn't answer quickly enough. That means yes. Grant recommended me for the position I have now. I knew that. 5 years earlier, Grant had introduced Colin to an executive at a large facilities management company. Colin was now a regional operations director. What does that have to do with me? When Grant recommended me, he talked about my background. What background? Colin looked exhausted. He told them I was self-made, that I'd put myself through school while dealing with a difficult family situation. I stared at him. Did you put yourself through school? No. Did Grant know that? No. There were no forged documents, no fake degree, no crime. Just a story. But that story had been useful enough that Colin had protected it for years. So yesterday wasn't really about Mallory's family being formal. No. You were worried Grant would thank me publicly. Yes. And if he did, somebody might ask questions. Colin nodded. I understood now. He hadn't removed me because he was embarrassed by my suit or my old truck. He had removed me because I was evident. I'm going to breakfast, Dad. You don't get to decide where I go anymore. I could lose Grant's respect. I looked at him. That happened yesterday. He just hasn't decided what to do with it yet. I walked him to the door. Before he left, Colin turned around. Are you going to tell them everything? If they ask me a question, I'm not going to lie. His face tightened. That's what I'm afraid of. Then your problem isn't me. The next morning, I arrived at the Bennett's house at 9. Grant opened the door. No suit this time. Jeans and a gray sweater. Diane was in the kitchen. Mallory sat at the dining table. Colin arrived 3 minutes after me. Nobody touched breakfast. Grant started. I don't want this to become 6 people arguing about 20 years of family history. Good, I said. I want to understand what happened. Colin sat across from me. Grant looked at him. Did your father pay for your college? Colin glanced at me. Yes. All of it? Tuition? Most living expenses? Grant nodded. Did he help you get the interview at Merritt? Yes. Did he try to stop you from taking the job? No. Diane closed her eyes briefly. Grant continued. Have you ever regularly supported your father financially? No. Has he ever asked you to? No. No speeches. No excuses, just answer. Then Mallory asked, did Warren give us $80,000 for the house? Colin stared at the table. Not as a gift. That wording caught my attention. Mallory heard it too. What does that mean? The money came from his business. Without his permission? Yes. Diane pushed her coffee away. Grant looked at me. You knew about this? Since yesterday. And you're sitting here this calmly? I don't see what breaking your table would improve. Grant almost smiled. Almost. Then Colin said, I can pay him back. I looked at him. Can you? Yes. All 63? Mallory turned. 63. I explained the number again. Her face hardened. Yesterday you told me it was 25. I told you what I knew then. She looked at Colin. Do we have $63,000? Yes. That surprised her. Where? Our investment account. Mallory stared at him. What investment account? Colin froze. And suddenly the room changed. I hadn't expected that question. Neither had Grant. Mallory leaned forward. Colin, what investment account? He looked at me as though I had somehow caused this. I hadn't. I opened it before we got married. How much is in it? About $94,000. Mallory stood. You told me we had $12,000 in saving. We do. That's separate. Where did $94,000 come from? Bonuses, stock sales, some money I saved before we married. Grant interrupted. Is any of it Warren's? No. I watched Colin carefully. Are you sure? Yes. This time the answer came immediately. I believed him. Mallory didn't look relieved. So while we were talking about delaying kids because we wanted a bigger emergency fund, you had $94,000 I didn't know existed? Colin's voice dropped. I was going to tell you. When? No answer. Diane finally spoke. Mallory, maybe you two should discuss discuss that privately? Mallory shook her head. No, that's how we got here. Then she looked at me. I thought yesterday was about Warren, so had I. It wasn't anymore. The problem was larger and simpler. Colin had learned to manage relationships by controlling information. One version for me, another for Mallory, another for Grant, and whenever two versions got too close to each other, he moved someone out of the room. At the wedding, that someone had been me. Grant asked, why? Colin looked at it. Why what? Why hide the account? Colin was silent for a long time. Then he said, because I never wanted to need anyone. I nearly interrupted. I didn't. When Mom left, everything changed. I spoke then. Not everything. It did for me. Fair enough. He looked surprised that I conceded it. Colin continued. You were always working. I was. And I hated being the kid whose dad came to school in work boots. There it was. Not the whole explanation, but an honest piece of it. You remember the 8th grade career day? He asked. Yes. You came straight from a service call. My shirt was dirty. Tyler Brooks's dad was a lawyer. Megan's mother was a doctor. You had grease on your sleeve. I remember. I also remembered Colin barely speaking to me afterward. You were ashamed of me. I was 13. Then, he looked down. And later. That one landed differently. Nobody spoke. Finally, I said, being embarrassed at 13 is free. You don't owe me an apology for that. Colin looked up. But building your adult life around it costs some. Grant leaned back. I don't care that your father helped you. Colin looked at him. I know. No, I don't think you do. Half the people you were trying to impress had help. Colin said nothing. Grant continued. You turned normal help from your father into a story about overcoming him because you thought it sounded better. That was exactly it. Mallory sat down again. And every time the truth got close, you lied again. Yes, she wiped her eye. Did you marry me because of my family? Colin's head snapped up. No, think before you answer. I don't need to. For the first time that morning, his voice was firm. I married you because I love you. Mallory watched him. I wanted Grant to respect me. I wanted your friends to think I belonged. I wanted all of it. But I married you because I love you. She nodded one. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Then Colin turned to me. I'll transfer the $63,000 today. No. Everyone looked at me. Colin frowned. You just said it was yours. It is. Then let me repay it. You will. What's the difference? The difference is, you're not moving $63,000 out of an account your wife discovered 15 minutes ago. Mallory looked at me. I continued. You two figure out what money is actually yours, what obligations you have, and what happens next. Then you repay me on a schedule we put in writing. Colin stared. You want a contract? Yes. I'm your son. I noticed. Grant looked down, hiding a smile. Colin didn't. He nodded slowly. Okay. Breakfast ended around 11. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. As I walked toward my truck, Grant followed me outside. Warren, I turned. There's something I didn't want to bring up in front of Mallory. I waited. He held his phone. Last year, Colin applied for a partnership track position through someone I know. I didn't know that. He didn't get it. What does that have to do with me? Grant unlocked his phone. On the application, there was a section about community and professional background. He handed it to me. It was a screenshot. Most of it was ordinary, until I reached one paragraph. Colin had written about growing up with an absent mother and a father whose failing business left the family financially unstable. My business had never failed. I sold it profitably. Then I read the last sentence. Those experiences are why I have spent much of my adult life helping my father remain financially secure. I handed the phone back. Grant looked embarrassed for him. Warren, if Colin has been saying this professionally, the wedding isn't where this story ends. I looked toward the house. Through the window, I could see my son sitting alone at the dining table. No, I said, it isn't. I didn't show Colin the screenshot that morning. Not because I wanted to protect him, because I wanted to know whether it was one exaggerated paragraph or part of something larger. On Monday, called Tom Merritt. He had retired 2 years earlier. Warren Hale, he said. Been a while. We talked for a minute before I asked, do you remember hiring Colin? Sure. Do you remember how? You called me. Simple. Did Colin ever tell you I tried to stop him from taking the job? Tom laughed. No. You practically pushed him through my door. That was enough. I thanked him. Then Tom added, why are you asking? Family bookkeeping. Those books never balance. I almost smiled. My next call was to Susan, my accountant. I asked her to document the $63,000 properly. Not as a gift. Not as an informal family misunderstanding. Money removed without my approval. She emailed me the records that afternoon. I printed them and put them in a folder. Then I waited. Colin called Tuesday evening. Can we meet? Come over. He arrived carrying an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $63,000. I looked at it. Where did this come from? My investment account. Does Mallory know? Yes. Did she agree? It was my account. That wasn't my question. Colin exhaled. Yes, she knows. I took the check. Not dramatically. It was my money. Pretending I didn't want it would have turned repayment into another performance. Thank you. He seemed surprised. That's it? For the money? Yes. And everything else? No. He sat down. I placed Grant's screenshot in front of him. Colin read it. His face tightened. Grant sent you this? Yes. I didn't get that position. That's not the issue. I know. Did you use this story anywhere else? He didn't answer. Colin, not exactly like that. That meant yes. Where? My company biography used to mention that I came from a financially unstable home. Used to. I changed it last year. Why? Because it wasn't relevant anymore. Or because it wasn't true? He looked at me. Both. I folded my hand. What do you want from me? I don't know. Then I'll tell you what I don't want. He waited. I don't want an apology tour. I don't want you calling people and telling them what a wonderful father I was. I wasn't going to. Good, because that's not the point. I tapped the screenshot. You can tell people whatever you want about your childhood. You lived it too. If you felt lonely, say you felt lonely. If I worked too much, say I worked too much. He looked surprised. But you don't get to invent things I did, so your life sounds harder. Colin nodded. And you don't get to say you supported me financially when the opposite was true. I understand. Do you? Yes. I pushed the folder from Susan toward him. This is what actually happened with the $63,000. He opened it. I want you to keep a copy. Why? So 5 years from now, neither of us gets creative about what happened. That hurt him. It was supposed to. Not as punishment, as a boundary. He closed the folder. Mallory asked me to move out for a while. I hadn't expected that. Where are you staying? Hotel near work. For how long? I don't know. I nodded. Are you going to ask what happened? No. Why not? Because that's between you and your wife. He stared at the folder. Grant won't talk to me. He talked to you Sunday. He asked questions. That's different. Yes. Colin leaned back. I spent years trying to make him respect me. And? Now he thinks I'm a liar. I considered that. Are you asking me to fix that? No. Good. He gave a short laugh. I'm starting to hate that word. You'll survive. For the first time since the wedding, the tension eased slightly. Then he became serious again. There is something I need to do. What? Correct the professional stuff. I waited. My current boss has heard some version of it. From you? Yes. Then correct it. What if it changes how he sees me? It should. He looked up. That doesn't mean he has to fire you. It means he gets to see you based on accurate information. Colin was quiet. You make that sound easy. No, I make it sound necessary. He left around 8. Thursday afternoon, he called. I told my boss I was changing an air filter in the hallway. Old habit. What happened? He asked why I was telling him. What did you say? That I'd exaggerated parts of my background because I thought it made me sound more self-made. And? He said it was stupid. I laughed. So far I like him. Colin did too. Briefly. He also said none of it had anything to do with my current performance, but if I'd lied on any formal employment doc, I needed to tell HR. Did you? Yes. And? There wasn't anything material. No fake credentials. No false employment history. Mostly bios, interviews, conversation. So you're still employed? Yes. Then what's the problem? I have to live with everyone knowing. I put the filter cover back. Yes. Silent. Dad? What? I'm sorry. I didn't answer immediately. I know. That doesn't sound like forgiveness. It isn't. He took that quietly. Will it ever be? I don't know. At least that answer was true. On Friday, Mallory called me. I found something. Those words had become dangerous. What? Old messages between Colin and me. I don't think I should read your private messages. Not all of them. One. Why? Because it's about you. She sent a screenshot. It was from 4 years earlier. 2 months before their engagement. Mallory had written, "Your dad seems nice. Why don't we see him more?" Colin replied, "He's complicated. He only gets interested when he thinks I can do something for him." Then another message, "Trust me, distance is easier." I read it once, then deleted the screenshot from my phone. Mallory called again. "Did you see it?" "Yes." "I'm sorry. You didn't write it. I believed it. You were supposed to believe your boyfriend." She was quiet. "Do you know what bothers me most?" "What?" "I treated you like someone who had hurt him." That explained years of small things. Polite invitations, careful conversation, the slight distance I'd always assumed came from our different background. "Mallory, I'm not going to audit every dinner we've had." "I know." "Then don't." She exhaled. "I'm trying to decide whether I can stay married to him." I didn't respond. "I know he's your son." "He is." "Do you think people like this change?" That was not a question I could answer for her. "I think people change when telling the truth becomes more important than controlling what happens after they tell it." She was silent. Then, "Has Colin ever done that?" I thought about the last week. "He told his boss. That was after he got caught." "Yes." "He repaid you." "Also after he got caught." "Yes." She sighed. "That's what I mean." "So wait. For what?" "For him to tell the truth when nobody has evidence in their hand." Mallory didn't answer. 2 days later, that happened. Sunday morning, Colin called. His voice was different. "Dad, I need you to come to Grant's house." "Why?" "I told them something." "What?" "Something they didn't know." I looked at the clock. "What did you tell them?" He took a breath. "The real reason I proposed to Mallory when I did." I stood still. "What does that mean?" "I was going to wait another year." "So?" "Then Grant offered me the introduction that led to my current job. I understood where this was heading. And I didn't like it." "Colin, I didn't marry her for the job. That's not what I asked." "I know. What did you tell her?" Silence. "Then, I told Mallory that getting closer to her family made me realize I was ready to marry her." "And?" "The truth is, when Grant offered that introduction, panic." "Why?" "Because I thought if Mallory and I broke up, I'd lose the opportunity." I closed my eyes. "So you proposed?" "Yes." "Did you love her?" "Yes." "Were you planning to marry her eventually?" "Yes." "But the timing wasn't only about love." "No." There was no excuse in his voice this time. No attempt to make the answer prettier. "Why tell her now?" "Because Because she asked me last night whether there was anything else she could discover later. And you told her? Yes. Without her knowing? Yes. That was new. What happened? She took off her ring. I said nothing. She hasn't ended the marriage. Okay. But Grant wants me out of his house. Also understandable. Yeah. Then Colin said something I hadn't heard from him all week. Dad, don't come to defend me. I waited. Then why do you want me there? His answer was quiet. Because I'm going to tell Grant the whole story about my first job and college and the money. You've already told him most of it, not in front of Diane and Mallory. Why does that matter? Because I spent years making sure nobody ever had all the pieces in the same room. That sentence stayed with. At the wedding, Colin had solved that problem by removing me from the room. Now, 1 week later, he was asking me to walk into another room while he put every version of himself in the same place. I picked up my keys. I'm on my way. When I arrived at Grant's house, Colin was already sitting at the dining table. Same table as the week before. Different man. Mallory sat across from him. Her wedding ring was beside her coffee cup. Diane was near the window. Grant stood when I entered. Thanks for coming. I nodded and took the empty chair. Colin looked at me. I'm going to start from college. Start wherever the lies started, Mallory said. He accepted that. So he did. He told them I had paid his tuition, that I had helped with rent, that I had introduced him to Tom Merritt, that I had never tried to stop him from taking the job. Then he explained the $63,000. Nobody interrupted. Finally, he told Grant about the proposal. I loved Mallory, Colin said. I was already thinking about marriage, but when you offered that introduction, I started thinking about what would happen if we broke up. Grant's expression didn't change. So, you proposed to protect a job opportunity? No, Mallory looked at. Be careful, Colin nodded. I proposed because I wanted to marry you. I proposed when I did because I was afraid of losing everything that came with you. That was harder to say, which was probably why I believed it. Mallory stared at her ring. Do you understand how that sounds? Yes, like I was a package. I know. My family, my dad, his contacts. Yes, and you let me believe that weekend was some big realization about it. Yes, she looked away. Colin didn't reach for her. Good. Grant finally spoke. You know what I don't understand? Colin waited. I liked you before any of this. I know. No, apparently you didn't. Grant sat down. You thought I needed some story about a kid who dragged himself out of poverty. Colin said nothing. I grew up over my father's hardware store in Winston-Salem. Colin looked up. Grant almost laughed. My father sold paint and nails for 42 years. Diane's father drove a city bus. Diane nodded. Grant continued. You spent years trying to hide the exact kind of family we came from. That landed. Colin looked at me. I didn't know. Because you never asked, Grant said. The room went quiet. Then Diane asked, why Warren? Colin frowned. Why did your father have to become the villain? That was the question I had been waiting for. Colin looked at me for a long time. When Mom left, I was angry. I know. I blamed her at first. Reasonable. But she wasn't there to be angry at. I understood before he finished. So you used me. He nodded. You were there every day. Yes. You told me no. You made me do homework. You wouldn't buy me the car I wanted. You missed things because you were working. And when I got older, it was easier to remember those than everything else. I didn't rescue him from that sentence, Colin continued. Then I met Mallory, and the first time I told the story, I exaggerated. What did you say? She asked. That Dad worked all the time, and I mostly took care of myself. Mallory nodded slowly. And when you felt sorry for me, he stopped. You liked it, I said. Colin looked at me. Yes, there it was. No complicated psychology, no dramatic excuse. He liked what the story gave him. Respect, sympathy, a certain image of himself. And once people believed it, he said. I didn't want to lose it. Grant leaned back. So you kept making Warren smaller? Yes. I had spent the last week waiting to hear something that would make all of it understandable. That was probably as close as I was going to get. Mallory picked up her ring. She didn't put it on. What happens now? Colin shook his head. I don't know. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. I stay at the hotel. You take whatever time you need. We separate the account. I'll show you everything. And if I decide I can't do this, Colin swallowed. Then you can't. No begging. No speech about vow. That was also new. Mallory nodded. Then Colin turned to me. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. A small, tired smile crossed his face. But I need to ask you something. What? Do you want me to tell everyone from the wedding? No. He looked surprised. Why not? Because I don't need 200 people to know I paid your tuition. But they think. I don't care what they think. That was true. I cared what my son thought. There was a difference. Correct anything that affects other people, I said. Correct anything professional that isn't true. Correct what you told your wife and her family. I pointed toward the room. But I'm not spending the next 6 months managing your reputation. Grant nodded. Colin looked at the table. Okay. I stood. Mallory looked at me. You're leaving? This part isn't mine. Outside, Colin followed me to the driveway. For a moment, it reminded me of the wedding, except this time he wasn't asking me to disappear. Dad, I turned. I moved your place card. I know. His face tightened. Mallory didn't know. I know that too. I told the coordinator there'd been a mistake. Why? Because if you sat next to me, Grant Grant might include you in the speech. Then people would start talking to you, and eventually somebody would notice your stories didn't match. Yes, I opened my truck. Colin stood beside the door. I spent my wedding trying to keep you away from people. Yes, that's hard to say out loud. Probably good that you said it. He nodded. Then he looked at my truck. You still have the same one. It's 7 years old. I know. I like it. He gave a faint smile. When I was a teenager, I hated that truck. You hated every vehicle that wasn't yours. He laughed. A real laugh this time. Then it faded. I was embarrassed by you for things that weren't embarrassing. I didn't answer. I'm sorry. I know. He looked disappointed. Maybe he wanted more. He wasn't getting it yet. I drove home. For the next month, I saw Colin twice. Once when he brought me the written repayment record Susan had prepared. Once when he asked for help moving into a small furnished apartment. I helped. Not because everything was fixed, because he needed another pair of hands. And I had too. Mallory stayed in their house. They started marriage counseling. I didn't ask what they discussed. Grant stopped recommending Colin professionally. He didn't sabotage him either. That distinction mattered. Colin kept his job. His boss made him correct an internal biography and remove a paragraph about his background from a leadership profile. Nothing dramatic happened. No firing. No public humiliation. He simply had to work in a place where a few people now knew he had exaggerated his past. One afternoon, he called me. Something happened at work. What? A new guy asked what my dad did. I waited. What did you tell him? That you owned an HVAC company for 31 years. And? That you sold it and retired. Sounds accurate. He asked if that's why I got interested in building system. I smiled. What did you say? Yes. Another pause. Because it is. That was the first time Colin told me about correcting something nobody had challenged. No evidence on the table. Nobody catching him. Just a choice. I remembered what I'd told Mallory. Wait until he tells the truth when nobody is forcing him. Maybe this was small. Small was fine. Real change usually is. 3 months after the wedding, Mallory called. Colin is moving back home. Okay. We're not pretending everything is fixed. Good. He told me I should call you before he does. Why? He wants to invite you to dinner. I laughed. Does he need permission? No. Then why are you calling? Mallory was quiet for a second. Because it's at our house, with my parents. I understood. The same families, the same people. A table again. What are we celebrating? Nothing. That interested me more. No birthday? No. No announcement? No. Just dinner? Just dinner. I agreed. When I arrived that Sunday, Colin opened the door. He looked nervous. Hey, Dad. Colin. Dinner was ordinary. Chicken, potatoes. Grant complained about property taxes. Diane told a story about a neighbor. Nobody apologized. Nobody made a speech. Afterward, Colin brought out coffee. There were 6 chairs around the table. He put a cup in front of me. Then said, there's something I want to tell everyone. I looked at him. Mallory did too. Colin took a breath. At the wedding, I asked Dad to leave because I was afraid he'd expose lies I'd told about him. Nobody moved. I've apologized to him privately, but I lied to all of you, so I'm saying it here too. Grant nodded. Colin continued. My father didn't abandon me. He didn't depend on me financially. I didn't put myself through college, and he helped me get my first interview. He stopped. That was enough. No performance. No attempt to turn confession into another impressive story. Then Grant asked, why tell us again? We know. Colin looked at me. Because last time Dad was sitting at this table, everyone was asking me questions. He pulled out the chair beside him. This time I wanted to say it before anyone had to. I sat down. That was when I knew the story had finally changed. Not because my son had learned how to apologize, because for once he had told the truth before somebody caught him. 6 months after the wedding, Colin and Mallory were still together. I wouldn't call everything repaired. That would be too neat. They still went to counseling. Their finances were completely open now. Separate personal accounts, one household account. No money moved without both of them knowing. Colin never asked me what I thought of that arrangement. Good. It wasn't my marriage. The $63,000 was back where it belonged. I didn't charge him interest. I also didn't call it a gift. Some distinctions matter. Grant and I became friendlier than we'd been before the wedding. Not close friends, but occasionally he'd call. One Saturday, he asked if I knew anyone who could replace an aging heat pump at a rental property. I thought I was retired. You are? I'm asking if you know someone. I know 9 people. He laughed. I gave him a number. That was it. No awkward gratitude, no discussion of Colin. Just 2 men talking about an air conditioner. I preferred it. Then, about 8 months after the wedding, Colin called me on a Thursday evening. Are you busy Saturday? Depends. On what? What you want? He laughed. There's a company dinner. That sounds terrible. It probably will be. Then why would I go? He hesitated. Spouses and parents are invited. I understood immediately. You don't need to prove anything to me. I know. Then why invite me? Because I want you there. Simple. I went. The dinner was at a hotel in downtown Raleigh. Nothing extravagant. Maybe 80 people. Colin introduced me to his boss. This is my dad, Warren. His boss shook my hand. I've heard about you. I looked at Colin. He noticed. The accurate version, he said. His boss laughed. So you're the HVAC guy. Retired HVAC guy. Colin says that's where he learned half of what he knows about building. I looked at my son. He shrugged. It probably is. There was a time when he would have hated hearing that. Now he said it in front of his boss. No speech, no apology, just the truth. Later, while we were getting our coat, Colin stopped. Dad, what? I've been thinking about the wedding. You should probably stop doing that, he smiled. I asked you to leave because I thought having you there made me look smaller. I waited, and it was the opposite. I didn't answer. He continued. I spent years trying to look self-made. Most people aren't. I know. Somebody teaches you. Somebody gives you a chance. Somebody watches your kid when you're late. Somebody knows somebody. He nodded. I know that now too. We walked toward the parking garage. At my truck, Colin stopped. I still don't know if you've forgiven me. I put my keys in my pocket. You keep asking the wrong question. What should I ask? Whether I trust you. His expression changed. Do you? More than I did 6 months ago. Not the answer he wanted, but it was the answer he'd earned. He nodded. Fair. I opened the door. Then he said, I'm not embarrassed by you anymore. I looked at him. Colin, I stopped needing your approval sometime around your 15th birthday. He laughed. That's not what I meant. I know. I closed the truck door again. What embarrassed you was never really me. It was the idea that somebody might look at your life and see how much help you had. He listened. There is nothing humiliating about being helped by your father. I know. The humiliating part was needing to make your father smaller so you could look bigger. His eyes dropped. I know that too. That was enough. I drove home. A year after the wedding, Colin and Mallory held a small anniversary dinner. Same hotel, different room, about 20 people. When I arrived, I found my place card. It was beside Colin. He noticed me looking at it. I didn't move it this time. Very mature, Mallory laughed. During dinner, Grant stood to make a toast. I looked at Colin. He caught me and smiled. Grant kept it short. He talked about marriage being less about looking perfect and more about being honest when perfect becomes impossible. Then he raised his glass. No mention of me. No mention of money. No rewriting history in the opposite direction. Perfect. Halfway through dessert, Colin leaned toward me. Dad? What? Thanks for staying. I looked at him. You asked me to leave last time. I remember. So do I. He waited. I took another bite of pie. Then I said, but you asked me to stay this time. He nodded. That was the closest we ever came to discussing the wedding again. And it was enough. Because the worst part of that night had never been table 14. It wasn't being removed from the photograph. It wasn't even hearing my son tell me to leave before the speeches. The worst part was realizing he'd spent years turning me into a man I didn't recognize because that version made his own story sound better. I couldn't force him to respect me. I couldn't force Mallory to forgive him. And I couldn't repair his reputation for him. So I did the only useful thing I could do. I stopped helping him hide from the truth. Colin had to correct his own story, repay his own debt, face his own wife, and live with the fact that some people would never see him quite the same way again. That wasn't revenge. Those were consequences. And somewhere along the way, my son finally learned something I'd tried to teach him when he was much younger. You don't become a bigger man by making the person beside you look smaller, especially when that person is the one who helped you get there.